Yeah, thanks so much, Chuck, and good evening to everybody over there. Good morning from Australia. I was actually very surprised when Chuck contacted me and asked for an Aussie to be a presenter at your club, so I'm actually honoured to have been asked. And fortunately, I'm sort of right at the end of a bout of bronchitis at the moment, so hopefully I survived the presentation here without too much coughing. I've got a little bit of a bug courtesy of one of my grandchildren, which seems to be a common thing. So tonight I'm going to talk about QSL cards, and it is a PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully it's not death by PowerPoint, but there's a lot of pictures in here. It'll probably take between 50 and 60 minutes if I just roll through it pretty quickly. Well, just trying to move to the next screen. It's not working for some reason. There we go. All right, so just a little bit about me. I'm married to Maria, my beautiful wife, Maria. She's actually an amateur radio operator as well, which is fantastic for this household. And we've got two grown-up children. They're 29 and 25, and we've got two beautiful little grandchildren. Last year in April, I retired from work. I spent 40 years in the police force. I joined as a teenager, and I spent 28 years of those 40 years as a detective. So I pretty much knew that I'd reached my threshold last year in April after 40 years. So I'm thoroughly enjoying retirement. And in regards to the hobby, I was a really avid teenager. You can see there a really horrible photo of me with the most disgusting haircut. I can't believe that I was allowed to get away with that haircut back in those days as a shortwave listener. And I actually went and did part of the amateur radio license when I was a 16-year-old, but then I joined the police at 17 in a 2-year training course. And so I just had 2 years of full-time study. So I never rolled on to finishing my amateur exams. And it wasn't until June 2010 that I actually went and got my license. There's 3 tiers of license here in Australia. So I started off with the basic entry license foundation. And it was almost 12 months to the day that I upgraded to my standard call. I'm pretty active on the bands, although I don't call CQDX all that often anymore. But in that 13 years, I've made about 110,000 QSOs. I'm very, very active out in the field. I do a lot of park work. I know Parks on the Air is quite a strong program over there in the USA, but I'm involved in an international program called Worldwide Flora and Fauna, which is an equivalent type program. And it's all about getting amateurs out into the field and operating from national parks and conservation areas. I'm a member of the ARRL. I'm actually one of, I think, only 4 or 5 here in Australia that have the ability to check QSL cards for the ARRL for programs like DXCC. And I do the same for CQ magazine, worked all zones and stuff like that. And I'm a former WI director as well, the national body here in Australia. So that's where I live. I'm down in the state of South Australia, so I'm in that central corridor and not far from the coast. So South Australia is the driest state in the driest continent. You would not know that where I live, because Australia is like the USA. It's such a big country. The climate varies very, very dramatically. So where I live, as I look out the window here at, 10 to 11 in the morning, there's drizzle outside, and it's beautiful and green. And that's where I live. I'm on a small farm, and that's sort of the back of the house there. and I'm surrounded by a lot of very big farms and lots of native bush. So every day I have kangaroos and koalas on the property here, which is a bit of a novelty for our friends that come up from the city. It's a beautiful place to live, aesthetically, and from an amateur radio point of view, it's absolutely magnificent because I have zero noise floor 24/7 on all of the bands. I can hear a pin drop here. So it's a fantastic place to operate from. That's my shack. It was actually just a small space underneath the mezzanine in my shed. And a mate of mine, he's a builder. He and I built a room out there. We're actually just about to extend the shack. I've got 2 towers on the property here. That's one of the towers there with my 5-element Yagi on it. And I'm pretty keen in the hobby. My wife's also keen, but not as keen as what I am. But when she jumps into the operator's chair, it's very, very hard to get the microphone back off of it. So what's an amateur radio QSL card? It's a documented confirmation of a contact with another amateur radio station. And these are a couple of QSL cards that I received back in the early 1980s when I was a shortwave listener. YV2BYT there in Venezuela, and some of you may have worked the famous Jim Smith on Norfolk Island. He was a very, very active DXer there. He's a silent key now. And I think virtually every night of the week I used to listen to a whole lot of the USA guys chatting on 40 metres, and one of those was W4MIP. You can see his QSL card there. QSL cards are also used by CB operators, shortwave listeners and broadcast stations. So you can see a USA CB QSL card there in the left, and on the right is a QSL card that I received from the Voice of America back in 1982. And these are just, I've got quite a large collection of broadcast shortwave listener QSL cards, and this is just a little bit of a selection of those. Radio Moscow, obviously, which is not around anymore, and Radio Peking. And now, where have I gone? China Radio International, it is known as now. A couple more there from Radio Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia and the Voice of Vietnam. But tonight I'm going to focus on amateur radio QSL cards because I'd be here for hours and hours talking about broadcast QSL cards. And within our hobby, it's a really traditional part of the hobby that dates right back to the very early years of the hobby of amateur radio. And you may have heard that term where a lot of people say it's the final courtesy of the QSO. Sometimes people refer to it as wallpaper. But I found this comment by a gentleman called Eric Trebilco. He is silent key now, but he was a very, very famous shortwave listener here in Australia. And he made these comments about QSL cards. And he said that he believed they were more than just a piece of wallpaper. He described them as a picture portraying the thoughts of a man and woman in layout, wording and colour schemes. And above all things, the QSL card helps to set the seal of friendship. So that was Eric's thoughts, and I'm sure that's shared by a lot of people about QSL cards. But what does QSL actually mean? Well, it was adopted from the Q code, which I'm sure everyone knows is a standardised collection of 3-letter codes that all start with the letter Q. And they were initially created in around about 1909 by the British government for the use of British ships and coast stations, and designed for commercial radio telegraphy. So what does QSL actually mean? It's a question and an answer. So the question is, can you acknowledge receipt? And the answer is yes, I'm acknowledging receipt. And as such, a QSL card is an acknowledgement card. That's not me, by the way, with the light globe, although it's very similar in appearance. And excuse me, I just wanted to talk a bit about the history of QSL cards. I got a little bit carried away when I researched this. You could talk about this for hours and hours. It's a fascinating area, but I wanted to just set the scene with dates, because I think this is important with QSL cards, just to show how very early they appeared with regards to our hobby. So as everyone knows, in 1901, Guglielmo Marconi communicated across the Atlantic, and that sparked the interest of all these radio enthusiasts around the world. So people started experimenting with radio. And in 1905, the first commercially produced wireless telegraphy transmitter and receiver actually went on the market. In 1905 in Australia, the Wireless Telegraphy Act was created. And in 1908, I found, there's a little bit of conjecture here, but in 1908, the Wireless Telegraphy Club of Columbia University was created, and that was the earliest recorded amateur radio club. 1910, the first and the oldest National Amateur Radio Society was formed. That was actually here in Australia, the Wireless Institute of Australia. And then something fairly profound happened in the radio world, and that was the sinking of the Titanic. Now, as a result of the sinking of the Titanic, it prompted all these new international radio laws. And one of those was an act, the Radio Act of 1912, that the US Congress approved. And that restricted amateurs to the single wavelength for 200 metres, and they had to be licensed. And then 2 years later, the ARRL was formed. Of course, World War I broke out and all amateur radio operations ceased in Australia in 1914. And the same happened in 1917 in the USA. So why do I tell you all about those dates? Because they're important with regards to where QSL cards fit into the very early stages of amateur radio. And I found that the very first recorded documentation about what we now call QSL cards was in a June 1916 issue of QST magazine, and a gentleman from Philadelphia, Edward Andrews, 3TQ, he wrote a letter into QST magazine, which had only just recently started, and he talked about receiving a card from 8VX in Buffalo, New York, where his signals were heard clear and strong. And these were the comments that Mr. Andrews made in QST. So he believed that the spirit of unselfishness that was evident in Mr. Fraser and others who sent cards, and he urged that members of the ARRL and readers of QST notify by postal and by the very next mail the owner of the station whose signals they hear. So he was trying to encourage the use of these QSL cards. And that's the cover of QST, June 1916, and the letter that Mr. Andrews, 3TQ, actually wrote to QST magazine. The editor came back and he actually said that he believed the idea of notifying amateurs was a fine one, and he sort of encouraged it, although you can see the editor's comment there was pretty limited. And then I couldn't actually find the original card from 8VX, but I did find this card, which was sent to another station only a few months later. So I presume that the card would have been very, very similar to this card. So you can see the card from back in those days is very, very different to the QSL cards that we have nowadays. Excuse me. And then in August 1919, a gentleman called Don Hoffman, 8UX, he was actually the cartoonist with QST magazine, and he wrote a letter to QST, and he came up with these comments, and he said, here's a little idea. And he talked about creating a template where if you heard a long distance ham, you could send this template to them. And as a result, despite the earlier 1916 letter, QST magazine actually accredited Mr. Hoffman as being the creator of, or the inventor of, what is now the QSL card, or they described it as the amateur DX report card. And that's the letter that Donald Hoffman actually wrote and the cover of August 1919 QST magazine. You can see the little template there that he suggested to be used. And a few years later, in 1919, again, it's open to interpretation, but it's believed that his QSL card was the first standardized QSL card. As you can see there, it contained a call sign, a frequency, a date, etc. Uncle Vic was 2UV. He later became G2UV, and he produced the first ever QSL card in Europe, which was around about the same time. And you can see a couple of examples there. The one on the left actually dates December 2022, so it's quite an old card. And he was a very well-known gentleman in Great Britain at the time, and often after his broadcast, this would be the sort of thing that he would say, you know, closing down after his test transmission. And he used to always say, I would be pleased to receive reports on this transmission, and all reports will be gratefully acknowledged. And then it was quite an interesting article again in 1924 QST magazine. There was a gentleman called Howard Pyle, 8ST. And I won't say too much about Mr. Pyle because there might be some descendants listening, but I think he was a bit bar humbug because he wrote quite a lengthy article, and he was quite critical of the amateur DX report cards that were floating around at the time. He said that they had many faults. He criticised amateurs who plastered their station walls with report cards. He talked about this cheap vaudeville humour that were on cards. And he said, take a little time and see if you can't evolve a DX card that'll be a credit to your station. So he was quite critical, and that's part of the article that he wrote in 1928. As you can see, they weren't referred to as QSL cards. 1924, I should say. They were referred to as amateur DX report cards back in those days. And they were later referred to as QSL cards. And these are a couple of old cards. Here you can see one from Australia on the left there, VK5MU. And that dates back to 1933. You can see a bit of an evolvement of QSL cards with pictures rather than just simply writing and a call sign on them. And quite an old card there on the right-hand side as well from a gentleman in the USA. There are virtually no cards in existence for the World War I period, nor are there cards around for 1940, because obviously there were restrictions on amateurs being able to operate during both World War I and World War II. But I did find all these ads. So in quite early days, the top one I think is from about 1925. Amateurs actually started to, or printing companies actually started to advertise printing ability for QSL cards. And then in 1912, when that Radio Act was passed, in the Radio Act in the USA, it talked about call signs commencing with a district number, followed by letters assigned to the operator. And you can see a map there of the USA showing the district numbers back then in 1912. The letters assigned initially started off as 2 letters, and then when they ran out of combinations, they moved on to 3. Some operators used U in the USA to indicate the USA before 6BZC, for example. Others used, as you can see here, NU for North America and USA. That was an informal thing that they actually did back in those days. And just a couple of examples of some old cards here. There's a 1922 card from William Schweitzer of New York. And you can actually see Mr. Schweitzer there on the right-hand side, operating in his shack. Very different shack to the shacks of nowadays. 1924 QSL card of 9AIO, which was a ARRL station in Chicago, Illinois, and that's the station on the right-hand side as well. I find these cards to be absolutely fascinating. So, and this is a 1926 card of a gentleman called Rufus Hargrove from Texas. That's Mr. Hargrove on the left there in his QSL card from 1926. So you can see very different the cards compared to today. This is quite a special one. This is Alf Traeger or Alfred Traeger, and an Australian card, actually from South Australia where I live. And the significance of this is Alf Traeger was an Australian engineer and inventor, and he was chiefly known for the development of the pedal radio in the School of the Air and the Royal Flying Doctor Service. So I'm sure you probably would have heard of the Royal Flying Doctor Service, but I'm not sure how many of you would have heard of this famous pedal radio that he invented. So that's actually Alf Traeger's QSL card. And Alf Traeger operating one of those pedal radios there on the right-hand side. And I found this card, which was pretty important to me because it was actually a very, very early QSL card from the very early 1900s from 5BR, the Blackwood Radio Club, which subsequently became the Adelaide Hills Amateur Radio Society, which is the club to which I belong. Another old one from Nan, South Australia, which is only about 40 kilometres away from where I live. Again, you can see that they're pretty basic in nature. And in 1927, there was an International Radio Telegraph Convention, and they came up with these regulations, and that's where they assigned call signs to each country. So that's where K, N, and W came from for the USA, G for Great Britain, VHA to VMZ for Australia, and every country was allocated these call signs by the regulations that came out of the convention. So you can see the new example of call signs. There's one from California, W6CVL in 1930. This was an interesting one that I found. It was from 1933, hand-drawn by a young girl called Jean Hudson, W3BAK. She was only 8 at the time, and she was the world's youngest YL operator back in those days. So quite an interesting card. You can see her station there, W3BAQ. I presume that her father, the station must have been at a gas station. So it's a very interesting card. And then this one I found from Mrs. or Miss Poley, W1MJC. It's a 1940 QSL card. And on the QSL card, she's got, though most girls prefer hair waves, I get a big thrill out of airwaves. So that was her card from 1940. Then Reg Varney, he was the inventor of the G5RV antenna, which I'm sure most people would have heard of. That's quite an early card from 1937. And these are some QSL cards from countries that no longer exist that I collected. So within the hobby of amateur radio, and in fact outside of the hobby of amateur radio, there's a bit of a subgroup as well of people that actually collect QSL cards that are not amateur radio operators. So a lot of these countries that, no longer exist, the cards are very, very collectible. There's Hiram Percy Maxim Memorial Station, W1AW, QSL card. Whoops. Yeah, I'm not sure how to get back. Oh, there we go. D Expedition QSL cards. You can see the dramatic change in QSL cards over the years. There are a lot of amateurs who really seek after these D Expeditions and get a bit of rare DX in their logs. And generally speaking, the D Expedition QSL cards are, very, very colourful. They're often not just two-sided, they're folded cards, 4-page cards. I'll discuss that a little bit in a minute. Other amateurs are very keen on these special event QSL cards. So there's a few examples there from Russia and Australia. I'm sorry, and I got a bit confused. So this is the obsolete countries. Some very old cards there from the former Yugoslavia, the German Democratic Republic, the USSR, and Czechoslovakia. So if you just go back and think about the D Expedition cards and compare them to these, they're very, very different. So that's a bit of a history of QSL cards, but why QSL? Well, for me, it's the thrill of receiving a QSL in the mail. I QSL in a variety of different ways, and I'll discuss those shortly. But I really like physical cards. Actually, getting a card in the mail is actually quite a thrill for me, and it creates a lot of memories. But other people QSL for awards, DXCC, and it's obviously a hobby within a hobby. Amateur radio is such a diverse hobby that what floats somebody's boat doesn't necessarily excite the next person, but some people are very, very keen in collecting QSL cards. Do you have to send a QSL card? No, you don't. It's not compulsory to send a QSL card to confirm a contact. And in fact, if you've worked a station 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe 50 times over, it's really considered environmentally wasteful to send a hard copy QSL card for each contact with that station. So the types of QSL cards that are out there, they're of hard copies, which I've talked about, that you either send to the station direct or via the bureau, and I'll talk about direct and bureau shortly. There are EQSL cards, Logbook of the World, which I'm sure everybody over there in the USA would have heard of. And then there are a bit of a thing that's popped up in recent years, these electronic QSL cards that get sent to you via email. The bottom right is my AX5 PAS EQSL card. Each year, 3 times a year on special days here in Australia, we get to replace the VK with AX as a special prefix. So that's my EQSL card. So you can, when you're choosing a card, you can design your own and then go down to the local printer and get them to produce them. There are all these QSL creators on the web, or you can order one from any of the large QSL printing companies, which is what I do. I get Gennady in the Ukraine, UX5UO. Gennady's been printing my QSL cards for years and years now and provides a magnificent service. But when you design your card, just give consideration to the layout, what photos you want to put on there, what logos, and consider the quantity that you want to order. You may not be active, but bear in mind the larger quantities that you order from these companies, it lowers the cost of the cards. And the IAAU and the member societies like the ARRL recommend these sizes. So you can see they're 3.5 by 5.5 inches. The reason why they came up with that was because if you come up with all these weird sizes, unusual dimensions, it slows down the work of the bureaus when they're sorting the cards. But as I said earlier, with a lot of the DXpeditions, it can be a gatefold design with multiple pages. And this is a bit of an example of that. This is a little mini DXpedition that my wife and myself and 4 mates of mine went on earlier this year. We activated an island for the Islands on the Air program and for worldwide flora and fauna. And starting from the top left, as you work across, that's the 4 pages of the QSL card. So a gate design QSL card that I designed. What does a QSL card contain? Of course, it's got to have your call sign. There are recommendations that you actually have the call sign on both the front and the back of the card. But all of those other dot points there, generally speaking, you'll find on a card. If you do activate an island for Islands on the Air, it's important to actually have the IOTA reference and the island name on the card because that's required under the IOTA rules. What should you not have on the card? So don't have religious statements or political statements on your cards. There are cards that are floating around that have those. So what seems humorous to you may not necessarily be funny to somebody else in a foreign country, and what may not be offensive to you might be offensive to somebody in a foreign country. And not just in a foreign country. I see a lot of cards, floating around with, girls in bikinis and stuff like that. That might have been acceptable back in the 1970s, but in the period of time that we live in now, that could offend some people. So just be really cognizant about what you have and what you should not have on your QSL card. And this is Tim M0URX. He's a very, very famous QSL manager. And he said the first thing I would say is a QSL card should be given as much thought as the radio station in your shack. So that's the importance that Tim places on the design of a QSL card. He went on to say that it can show your culture, your shack, your antennas, your job, and so much more with just a little bit of imagination. This is my QSL card. Now, I've broken one of their rules because when I looked at my QSL card, I didn't have my call sign on the back of the card. Now, I've only just recently designed this card. I had another card, and earlier this year I just decided to redesign it. So that's the front of my QSL card, and that's the rear of my QSL card. Fairly typical. You can see all the information there that I discussed earlier, the date, the month, the year, the time in UTC. I'll talk about that in a minute. My postal address, how to QSL. You can see down the bottom via my manager, and the rigs and the antennas that I use, and some other detail on there as well. And these are my special QSL cards. You go back to what I said about the AX prefix, and I also have a VK5 PAS portable card that's just for my portable operations. It's amazing here in Australia the number of Australian operators that use this AX prefix, but I don't have a specialised AX QSL card, which I think is wrong. They send out the VK QSL card, and of course, if you're going to use that in awards, it means nothing because that's not the station that you worked. So if you are going to have these special call signs, I always say to amateurs, take the time to get those QSL cards designed and printed for you. These are my very first shortwave listener cards that I used. I don't have the back of those cards, and in fact, I don't think I've got any of them left anymore. And that was my original log that I used when I was a shortwave listener as a teenager. I use an electronic log now. And then I designed a shortwave listener QSL card as well. So I sent out a huge amount of these to amateur radio operators on and off over the years. my interest sort of peaked and waned with shortwave listening. So some basics when filling out a card: never ever use local time. And I still see some amateurs using local time. It means nothing, of course, because as we know, I'm in the morning, you guys and ladies over there are in your evening. Always use UTC time on your QSL cards. If you're writing a signal report, use the RST system. Make sure you've got legible writing, not doctor's writing. If you don't have good writing, then you can use printed labels if your handwriting's poor, and ensure that the details on the card are accurate. If you make a mistake, don't tip X it out or white O it out or cross it out. Start again, because for somebody like me as a card checker, any alterations to the card can potentially make the card invalid for any awards. Some other tips: be patient, because the QSL Bureau, depending on what country, can take some considerable time. Even direct QSL cards don't come back overnight. And make sure you listen to any QSL instructions that are given by the station on air. Often they'll actually say, you know, please QSL via the Bureau, or I've got a manager. So have a listen to what they're actually telling you. Make sure that you've recorded the DX station's call sign. Ensure the DX station has your call sign correct, because there's nothing worse than having a busted call and not being in a DXpeditions log. And ensure you've got the DX station's call sign correct, because, and I've got doping there, but it's meant to be copying. People copy errors from the DX cluster and they don't actually listen. And so they send a QSL card to a station that doesn't exist. So make sure you've got the other station's call sign correct. And you'll see on QSL cards, PSC or TNX. That's simply what it means there. PSC is please QSL. So if you get a card and it's got PSC circled, then they're asking for you to send a QSL card back. If it's got thanks, then they're either implying they've received your QSL card, or they don't necessarily want a QSL card back. So that's what PSC and TNX means on the cards. And if you say you QSL, then please QSL. There are so many amateurs that on QRZ say they QSL direct, and you take the time to send them a QSL card with return postage, and you never ever get a QSL card back. So if you say you QSL, please QSL. And I've sort of discussed this a bit, but read the instructions or listen to the instructions. If the station is on qrz.com or they've got a website, then follow the instructions that are on their qrz.com page or their website. And you can see that that's my qrz.com page, and I've highlighted my QSL information there. And if you click on the detail section on a person's qrz.com page, it comes up with this next screen, and there's further information there about how the station QSLs. So you can see I've got details there about my manager, but I'm also prepared to accept cards via eQSL and Logbook of the World. Many of the big QSL managers have quite detailed info on either their website or QRZ about how to QSL to the station that they're managing. So please take the time to read, because some of them actually get quite dirty if you don't follow the instructions that they've laid down. Physically sending out cards, these are the three ways. So you can either send via the Bureau, or direct to the actual station that you work, or to the station's QSL manager. And the Bureau, everyone would have heard about the Bureau, no doubt. I don't know how popular the Bureau is in the USA. My own personal experience, it doesn't seem to be as popular as it is in other countries, but the Bureau is basically a specialised post office for QSL cards. It's the least expensive way of sending a card, but you need to understand that not everybody uses the Bureau. And in VK, more than 10,000 QSL cards are received from overseas stations per month. So, and for many years, the Bureau was the most reliable, inexpensive and universal way for most countries to send QSL cards. Now that's changed a little bit in recent years. And the Bureau basically came about because it was developed to address, due to addresses of individual stations not being widely available back in those days. The internet wasn't around, international postage was expensive. And after World War II, you couldn't get addresses for the Soviet Union stations or the Warsaw Pact countries, and many of the call books were incomplete. And that's the reason that the QSL bureaus came about. This is a little article I found for the 1928 QSL Bureau in Australia. And in 1928, the QSL Bureau in Australia handled nearly 250,000 QSL cards. That was in 1928. 1932, the idea of a QSL Bureau in the USA was floated. Before that, the cards got distributed from ARRL headquarters. And there was that gentleman there, Mr. Smith, W2AEN. He took over the first bureau, and that was an article that I found in QST magazine of 1933 about that. And just some stats there. You can see even in 1933 alone, the second district in the USA handled 10,000 plus QSL cards. But 4 years later, they'd handled 3 times that amount of QSL cards. And in 2022, the ARRL QSL Bureau handles about 300,000 outgoing QSL cards per month. There's a small fee, and you've got to be an ARRL member. But if you go onto the ARRL website, you can read about that. I'm not going to have probably time to play that. If we do, I'll come back to that. But there's an excellent video there on YouTube about the ARRL QSL Bureau. And these are the impacts in recent years on QSL bureaus. So in today's society, amateurs have sort of become aware of environmental issues. They've become environmentally conscious. Electronic confirmation systems have been developed, EQSL Logbook of the World. A lot of the newer hams are not as interested in the tradition of QSL cards anymore. The cost of sending these big packages of QSL cards has really dramatically increased, and that's put budgetary pressures on various member societies. And of course, bureaus are staffed by volunteers as well. And as a result of that, in 2018, the IARU came up with this resolution that they encouraged the continued use of QSL bureaus for as long as it was economically justifiable to use them. Tips for bureau cards: make sure you follow the instructions of your representative body, e.g. the ARRL. If the station's got a QSL manager, then the card goes to that country's bureau, not the station work. And you may see on QSL cards, it's got a via section. So you'll put the station's QSL card, but in the via section, you put the manager's call sign. But be prepared to wait. It can take some time. Some bureaus are quicker than others and have better technology. The photos on the right are the LARC, the German bureau. They have an absolutely unbelievable system of processing their QSL cards with conveyor belts and barcodes and all sorts of stuff. And remember that the bureaus are staffed by volunteers. Direct is the most expensive way, because remember, you're paying postage both ways. But if you want to get a card back quickly, this is one of the quickest ways, certainly quicker than the bureau. And the advantage with bureau and direct cards is you actually have a physical card you can actually look at and enjoy. What do you send if you're going to send a card direct to get the card back? Because remember, it's important to have return postage in. Don't expect that these expeditions and other people are going to send a card back to you for free. Some people do. Others require return postage. So you can generally pop in US dollars or an international reply coupon, but just be aware that some countries' IRCs are not valid. And again, I go back to follow the QSL instructions that you're either told or you read about the station. Make sure you send the QSL card to the correct address. So if they have a QSL manager, then the card goes there. Don't send it to the station you work. Include a self-addressed envelope. Don't use flimsy envelopes. Use these heavy-duty envelopes. Make sure you include your return postage, US dollars or an IRC. Excuse me. Don't let the dollars or the IRC be visible either, because in some countries postal theft still occurs. So when I put US dollars into an envelope, even though you generally can't see through the thicker envelope that I use, I generally use a bit of A4 paper and I wrap the US dollars in that bit of A4 paper. And don't write call signs on envelopes, because it's a giveaway to people at the other end that it's an amateur that's sending a envelope. And some of these countries that are a little bit dodgy, where mail theft exists, they know about amateur radio operators, and they know it's likely that there's going to be US dollars in there. So don't put your call sign or their call sign on the envelope. Seal the envelope with sticky tape. Just make it a little bit more difficult for people to prevent tampering. Don't use commemorative stamps. Here in Australia, I presume in the USA, it's similar. You can actually go to the post office, and rather than actually having a physical stamp, they have an ink stamp on there. So it's not as tempting then for people at the other end to go, oh, gee, this is a nice stamp. I'm going to take this envelope. Try and make the letter look like a professional letter, not a personal letter. And some people actually cut a small corner in the corner of the envelope. I've never done this, so that, you know, these people can peek through and actually see what's in there. If they can't see dollars in there, then less likely to pinch the envelope. QSL managers, they manage QSL operations on behalf of other amateurs, particularly D expeditions, and that's because no bureaus exist for that country, and the operation's only short-lived, and the postal service to that particular country might be poor. But one of the other reasons why people use QSL managers is to maximise operating time. So I love collecting QSL cards, excuse me, but I hate writing them out. So I actually use a QSL manager, and that's Charles on the right-hand side. He's one of the best-known QSL managers in the world, and he handles all of my QSLing for me. Everyone would have heard about Clublog and OQRS. It's a system that enables amateurs to request a QSL card through a log search page in Clublog. And you have the option there of getting that card sent to you direct if you make a payment, or the card sent to you via the bureau. And it's a very quick option, quicker than direct, because you're actually requesting your card immediately from the station or the QSL manager. You don't have to send your QSL card. They process your application and they put the card in the mail or to the bureau for you. And that's what Clublog looks like. You can see there the log to search area. In this case, I've got 4 Whiskey 6 Romeo uniform, the Timor operation that's going on at the moment. and it will show you there the contacts. So I've made contacts with them on FT8 on 10, 15 and 10, and you can see the request QSL card option there. So when you click on request QSL, it takes you to this page here where you can request the card via the bureau or direct. In this case, you can see no bureau cards offered. 4 Whiskey 6 Romeo uniforms only sending cards direct. So that's the OQRS system. It's absolutely brilliant. Very, very quick if you want a card returned to you quickly. And some of the QSL managers actually have a OQRS option on their website as well. So this is on Charles's website, M0OX. So you can go on, physically request a card, no need to send your card. A lot of these DXpeditions are not interested in receiving your card at all. Another big option that's been popular in recent years is this PayPal ability. So this is one of the big Spanish QSL managers who manages PJ2 MAN. And you can see there his QSL instructions, but also PayPal. It's another quick way of getting a card. PJ2 MAN is obviously not really interested in getting your QSL card, but you pay via PayPal. In the notes area, you put your call sign and all your QSL information. Oops, sorry, gents and ladies. EQSL is designed to be the fastest, easiest and cheapest way to exchange QSO. It's fast upload. You can apply for EQSL awards online and you can print out a card. It's an electronic card, but if you actually want to print out the card, you can do that. You're not receiving a physical hard copy card. These are electronic cards, but EQSL is very, very popular. And that's the address for EQSL. Logbook of the World, another very popular program. Of course, I subscribe to Logbook of the World, being an ARRL card checker. Again, it's fast upload. But the thing is here with LOTW, you don't get a physical card or an electronic card. You get a credit towards awards such as DXCC. And there are some fees involved there with Logbook of the World. I'll provide the slides to you, Chuck, in the next couple of days for any of these addresses here. But and as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's been quite a big influx in this electronic email QSLing, I should say. So that's particularly with FT8, because you can rack up so many contacts in FT8 in a very short space of time. So I get a lot of these email electronic QSLs, and that's one from a gentleman there in California. And of course, you can create these cards if it's just a bit of a one-off thing. My wife and I went to Norfolk Island. Maria wasn't keen to operate too much over there. So rather than laying out the cost of printing up cards, she designed her own cards. So that's Maria operating on Norfolk Island, and we sent those cards out via email. And I'm almost at the end of the presentation here. So what do you do with all of your QSL cards? You can put them into photo albums, and the photo there is actually in my shack. I've got hundreds of these photo albums that are full of QSL cards. So that's an option, one way of storing them. You can have display boards, frames. The other way that I do it as well is I scan all of my QSL cards. Quite a time-consuming process, but I put all my QSL cards up on my website as well for people to have a look at. And we're all going to fall off the perch eventually. It's inevitable. What do you do upon your passing? And I always say to amateurs, consider passing on your collection to one of the historical QSL card collections. Don't let those QSL cards go into the bin. The photo there is actually the WIA warehouse in Melbourne, and you can see some of the filing cabinets there. The WA has one of the finest QSL card collections in the world, not just from Australia, but from amateurs all around the world. And again, I don't expect you to write all these down. I'll provide the slides to Chuck, but these are some very interesting sites. There's some magnificent websites that display QSL card collections dating back to the most earliest years of QSL cards in our hobby. And there are some very, very good, and I might add some very, very poor YouTube videos as well. But the links there are some of the excellent YouTube videos that I found about QSL cards. So that's my presentation, and I think you probably should have me back now. So thank you very much. I really had to compact it very quickly. I couldn't go into the process about how eQSL works and Logbook of the World because I'd start to hear snoring from the audience. But I highly appreciate the offer to present at your club this evening. And I hope you found the presentation interesting and maybe spurred you into QSLing again. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, I want to say, first of all, thank you, Paul. One of the reasons I saw you online and the reason I asked you is, I'm one of the, what I call more inexperienced hams. I don't like to use age. I'm inexperienced. I've been doing about for 8 years, but it is part of the hobby that is kind of fading away because of cost and environmental and everything else. But I thought that's, I looked at your website and said, I think this would be a great presentation to maybe get the club back into doing QSL cards. Our club is starting to actually develop our own again. We've done a special event last year for the 75th anniversary of the Transistor. We created a QSL card for that and sent it out. The club has a QSL manager that handles all of our cards for us. So, our club is pretty active and trying to get more active in the QSL cards and making sure people get those. And we got 2 on design right now for just general events. We did one for Winter Field Day, things like that. So I figured this would be a really good presentation for our club to get a bit more information, and hopefully people get cards and get on HF and or even UHF, VHF, doing like a polo or a soda, and potentially doing something like that as well. In fact, we have an event in August, I believe, that's going to be doing 14ers here in Colorado, the summits on UHF and VHF. So that should be really interesting as well. But again, thank you. Steve, did your question get answered? KF0AGY? I saw you had one in the chat.
Oh, I didn't look at that. Just having a look now. So
I think it got answered, but
I just want a standardization. I know probably each country has its standardized card, and I was just curious of how each one of the countries kind of has a and I got my answer kind of answered. I had another question about the younger generation, how they are going to use a QSL card. I think they're going to be more computer literate, maybe PDFs or something like that they can send instead of trying to graft up their own. And then from that, a repository on their computer, instead of a hard copy type thing, Paul. But yeah, that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, the only real standardization is the actual physical side of the card, and the recommendations behind that is, of course, because of the bureau and the processing of the cards at the bureau. But as far as what goes on your card, that's the uniqueness of QSL cards. That you can with the limitations that I mentioned about religious stuff and political stuff and offensive stuff, you can put whatever you want on your card. So some cards are very, very unique to the individual and the country. So this is actually my older card that I've just replaced this year. So you can see the kangaroo theme for me for Australia, but that's because where I live, kangaroos are seen here on a regular basis. I did actually see a presentation by a USA gentleman that said, just be aware that you can be patriotic, but not to be over patriotic on your card, because some countries can get offended about that. So you just got to be a little bit cognizant. The other thing I heard from this same gentleman, excuse me, was that back in the 70s and I think he said the 80s, from the former USSR countries, he would regularly get a request, not only with the QSL card, please send me a Playboy magazine. He said that occurred quite regularly, which I found just amazing. So, the only standardization is the size of the card, really.
Yeah, for mine, I actually have a moose that I took out of Rocky Mountain National Park. So kind of a unique sighting that I happened to catch one time. Anybody else have any questions? Online?
That was very good. Enjoyed it.
I was in Canada just before COVID, Chuck, and one of the things I actually wanted to see a moose, but I never got to see a moose. I saw plenty of bear when I was there, but never a moose. So I'll have to have a look at your QSL card to replace that memory.
I think I have a picture on my QRZ page. If I don't, I'll put it up there. But yeah, it's I did that, and I did the clubs that I'm a member of. But now that's expanded, so I got to do my cards all over again. That I joined more clubs. So
I'm not sure that yes, EQSL has come about, Logbook of the World has come about, but I'm not sure that this interest in QSLing is really dying off. I mean, you might see behind me here, but I received these in the mail from my QSL manager the other day. All these QSL cards, hard copy QSL cards that people have sent to me. So, I don't think that for some the hobby of hard copy QSLing is dying off, but it's still a very, very popular part of the hobby. And again, for me, I find it really exciting to receive a hard copy QSL card. It's a memory of that contact, and the card can tell a lot about the person that you work. So eventually, when I become a silent key, I hope to pass on all those QSL cards to the WIA. But like I say, other than us amateurs, there are people that are non-amateurs that actually collect QSL cards. And I saw a YouTube video last night, just before I went to bed, from an American guy, a young lad in the hobby, and he went to a garage sale or an auction, and the people there were actually selling these old QSL cards. And he thought it was quite sad, so he bought those cards. And through his research, he actually found that some of those people were still alive. These are cards going back to 1970s, and he's actually sent those historic QSL cards to those amateurs, which I thought was a pretty amazing thing to do.
that's cool.
Paul, what are your favorite bands, or which ones do you operate most frequently?
I'm pretty active on 20 meters. In the Australian time in the afternoon, or at 0500 UTC, I'm involved in a net that's called the Australia, New Zealand and Africa DX net, the ANZA DX net. I'm one of the net control stations there, but we get a large number of North American stations that check into that net on a daily basis. That's on 14.183. So I'd really encourage you to think about the ANZA DX net 14183 at 0500 UTC. But during the evenings as well, I am pretty active on 20 metres sideband and work into North America. There's another big American net called the Southern Cross DX net. I'm not sure if anybody's heard of that, run by Jack W1FDY. And I'm a fairly regular check-in to Jack's net there. But yeah, I love 20 metres. I'm limited to only 100 watts here as well because of being a standard operator. So I love working DX on 40 metres, but with 100 watts, it's a bit more of a challenge. I've got a 2-element 40-metre beam here. So I generally work into the USA relatively well on 40 as well.
Listen for you on the air and try to make a contact.
Yeah.
That would get your card.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I'm pretty active during our afternoons and evenings on 20 metres. So Jack's net W1FDY, the Southern Cross DX net, is a great net that would give you the ability to get on there and work VK for the very first time. Just in the last couple of months on that net, I think I've worked about 12 or 15 USA stations that had never ever worked VK on phone before. So it's a great net to consider.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely have to listen for that. The 0500, that would be 11 p.m. here.
Yeah, and Jack's net is I think that's at 1100 UTC. That's on 14238 at 1100 UTC.
1600, 5 o'clock here. So, all right, cool. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Anybody else have any other questions for Paul? Well, we definitely had a nice turnout for you, Paul. So I do appreciate it again. I think it's a topic that, like I said, some folks know about, some didn't. So I know I learned quite a bit off of it, being a less experienced ham. So again, thank you very much and really appreciate it. And would you be willing to do another club if I hit you up for it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, look, I've been to the USA a couple of times, and I thoroughly love the USA, North America. So I've enjoyed my trips over there each time that I've been, and I've got a lot of fantastic ham friends in the USA. So I'll be very, very happy, Chuck. And like I say, I was very surprised to have been asked in the first place. So last year I received an email from Eric from QSO Today to be interviewed by Eric. He runs a podcast, and I think he's interviewed about 500 amateurs now, but there's only been 10 of us in VK. And I said to Eric, I'm not a very interesting person. I don't know what I'm going to talk about in an hour, but it was amazing. So, yeah, I'm very humbled to be asked by you to present tonight. So thanks very much.
You're very welcome. And yeah, I'll probably hit you up again. There's another club I'm a member of. It's a DX club. So this would be just perfect for them. But I'll get with you later and email you and see if you're available.
Okay. Thanks so much. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the evening over there. And I can actually see a little bit of sunshine. And I kid you not, if I could turn my computer screen, I'm looking out at one of the paddocks here. I've got about 7 kangaroos, only about 30 metres away from me here in the paddock. So
It's we just have darkening skies because it's getting dark out and mosquitoes. Well, thank you again, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate it, and I'll be in touch, Chuck.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
That's for the club this evening.
Bob, are you there still?
Yeah, he's there. Oh, there it is.
Oh, hey, Bob, For the QSL cards, if we do our own artwork, is there a preferred format or size, or do we need to worry about bleed and stuff like that, or does Dick do all that?
Yeah, he's teaching me how to do that for him, but 3.5 by 5.5 is the standard postcard size that he likes to work with.
Okay, so just format the artwork to that dimension then?
Yeah.
Is it, does it matter if it's a raster file or how does he like that?
What kind of format?
What kind of format of file, I guess is what I'm saying.
So I do them in PowerPoint and then I save them in PDF to give to him.
Yeah.
So
I didn't know if you wanted like Illustrator or something like that or what.
yeah, I'm decent with PowerPoint and I know how to use it. So it costs less than Illustrator.
And there are some programs online that'll help you build a QSL card that actually convert it to a PDF once you're done.
I'll be darned.
I don't have them off the top of my head, but there are places like that'll do that. If you don't want to go through Dick, which, you know, the more the merrier, of course, for the club. There's other places that do QSL cards as well, but since we have a printer, it's good, just like we are fortunate to have an embroiderer as part of our club as well, as a reminder. If you'd like to get something embroidered with logo or your call sign, some gentleman to talk to, Harlan right here, we can get you hooked up, so. All right, any other questions, comments? Harlan?
I was wondering if anybody would be interested in working on or cobbling together a 10-meter propagation beacon.
That could be interesting.
I don't know whether to, if the club, using the club call signs or put it in somebody's residence or something like say somewhere around 5 to 10 watts, somewhere like that, propagation beacon somewhere between 28 to 200 and 28, 300.
Send me an email and I'll add it to my list of stuff that from the desk out that I always send out. And see if we can get you some interest.
Yeah, I don't know how to do that, but I'd be interested in learning.
Yeah, me too. That's what
It's all about.
Yeah.
Anything else? All right, as always, thank you, everyone. Have a great week. For you newcomers, thank you. Hopefully you got something out of it. And we'll see everybody next month. And I'm trying to remember, I think we have a presentation on the books, but I don't know what it is. Oh, and then you next month, Bob?
I'm doing September 20th.
Oh, you're doing September. So I think August is open, so you got an idea for a presentation? Let me know. If not, maybe stuck with me doing a presentation, so. Yeah, so you better start looking for people. Yeah. All right, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you. Have a great week. Make some contacts and keep an eye out for the newsletter or the new from the desk up with